The rain had been falling for 3 hours without a break. Michael stood at the front desk of the Riverside Lodge, a motel that charged $42 a night and smelled like carpet cleaner and old cigarettes, and watched a woman in pale blue scrubs argue in a low, exhausted voice with the night manager. Her name badge was still clipped to her collar. She had a single duffel bag at her feet. The manager said she was $40 short and the room was needed. Michael reached into his jacket pocket, counted what he had left, and set it on the counter without a word. He did not ask her name. He did not wait for gratitude. But when she turned to look at him before walking down the corridor just once, just briefly, there was something in her eyes he could not name, something older than relief. The next morning, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside his apartment, and Michael's life stopped being ordinary. Michael Carr was 33 years old and had been managing on not quite enough for most of his adult life. He worked the overnight shift at a cold storage facility on the edge of town, loading and cross-checking freight manifests until 4 in the morning, then driving home on empty streets to sleep 4 hours before his daughter woke up. The work paid $14.20 an hour. He had been doing it for 2 years and had not been offered a raise. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had stopped improving itself sometime in the early 90s. The hallway light had been out for 6 weeks. The boiler made a sound like a trapped animal every time the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. But the apartment itself, Michael kept it clean. He made sure of that. He made sure of it the way a person keeps a promise to themselves. His daughter's name was Lily. She was 6 years old and believed, with a certainty that could not be argued with, that her father was the smartest man alive. She had dark eyes like her mother, and a laugh that could fill a whole room. Her mother had left when Lily was 2, not dramatically, not with a fight, just gradually and then completely, until one day there were no more calls and no forwarding address. Michael had never told Lily anything bad about her mother. He figured the truth was complicated enough, without adding bitterness to it. The medical bills had started 10 months earlier, when Lily developed a respiratory infection that required 2 emergency room visits and a follow-up with a specialist. Insurance covered most of it. Not all of it. The remainder sat in a folder on Michael's kitchen table, underneath a stack of mail he checked every few days with the particular dread of someone who already knows what the news is. He was behind on the rent by 1 month. He had borrowed $300 from his coworker Dennis and paid back $260. He had $118 in his checking account and $40 in cash. The night he went to the Riverside Lodge, he had not planned to stop there. He was driving back from a late grocery run, the kind where you study the price per ounce of everything and put things back on the shelf with the quiet calculation of a person who has done that math before. He pulled into the motel lot because his left rear tire had been low for 2 days, and he wanted to check the pressure at the machine near the side entrance. That was all. He was not supposed to be standing inside at 11:45 at night, listening to a woman in scrubs be told to leave. Her name, he would learn later, was Amelia Whitmore. She was 29 years old and had been working a double shift at St. Francis Medical Center, 3 miles away. She had left her wallet at the hospital, not her whole bag, just the wallet, in the locker room after changing, and by the time she realized it, the locker room was locked and the facility manager had gone home. She had enough cash in her jacket pocket for the room, but not the tax, $40.12 short. She had been calm about it at first, explaining quietly to the man at the desk. He had not been interested in calm. Michael stood near the door for about 90 seconds before he moved. He ran through the calculation honestly. The $40 was 2 days of groceries. It was most of what he had left until Friday. Lily had eaten everything in the house, and he had bought pasta and peanut butter and juice and apples. And he had $38 and some change left in his pocket. And he knew, standing there, that giving it away was not a rational decision. He gave it away anyway. He set the money on the counter and told the manager that covered it. The manager looked at him with the bored suspicion of someone who had seen stranger things and decided not to argue. He handed over a key card. Michael did not look at the woman in scrubs. He picked up his grocery bag and turned to go. "Wait." Her voice was quiet, careful, like someone choosing their words in a language they weren't fully sure of. "You didn't have to do that." He turned around. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not quite gratitude, not quite surprise. Something more complicated than either. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, and there were lines of tiredness around her eyes that told him she had been awake for a long time. "It's fine," he said. And then, because it was the truth, "I hope you get some sleep." He walked out into the rain. He checked the tire pressure, drove home, put the groceries away without turning on the kitchen light so he wouldn't wake Lily, and went to bed. He lay there for a while thinking about Friday's paycheck and whether it would stretch to cover the rent shortfall. Then he stopped thinking and fell asleep. He did not think about the woman again that night. He did not imagine, in any version of himself lying in that dark apartment, that she had been watching from the window as he walked back to his car, memorizing his license plate. The next 4 days were ordinary, in the way that difficult lives are ordinary, full of small negotiations and minor indignities that don't register as events because they happen too consistently to stand out. Michael worked his shifts. He came home tired. He made Lily breakfast and walked her to school and picked her up and made dinner and helped her with letters and numbers, and she told him long, detailed stories about things that had happened at recess that he listened to with complete attention because she was the best part of every day, without question, without competition. His supervisor at the cold storage facility was a man named Gary Pittman, who had a talent for making people feel that their presence was a bureaucratic inconvenience rather than a contribution. He told Michael on Wednesday that his productivity numbers for the previous quarter were not where they needed to be, which Michael understood to mean that Gary had noticed Michael had submitted 2 formal complaints through HR about scheduling irregularities, and this was the response. Michael nodded and said he understood and went back to the floor and did his job. He did not tell Lily about the motel. When she asked on Thursday why they were having pasta 2 nights in a row, he told her he was saving up for something special. She accepted this without suspicion because she trusted him, and that trust was the most valuable thing in his life, and also, sometimes, the thing that pressed on him the hardest when the money didn't add up. He had stopped expecting things to come back around. That was not cynicism. It was something closer to clarity, a way of protecting himself from the particular disappointment of hoping for something from a world that had not been especially generous. He helped the woman because it was the right thing to do in that moment, and the moment was over, and that was that. He was not carrying the memory of it as something owed to him. He had genuinely, in the way of a person who has made peace with giving without return, let it go. The Thursday after he paid the motel bill, Michael was pulling out of his parking space at 7 in the morning when the first car turned onto his street. He didn't notice it immediately. Then a second car turned in behind it, and then a third, and they were all the same black late model, the kind of vehicles that suggested budgets he had never been near, and they were stopping in front of his building. He sat in his car and watched. A woman got out of the second vehicle. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat, and her dark hair was loose, and she moved with the particular ease of someone who had never had to second-guess the space she occupied. The motel felt like a different world. But his mind pulled the recognition forward anyway, the exhausted eyes, now rested, the careful voice, the nurse badge, now gone. She looked directly at his car. He got out slowly, the way a person moves when they are not sure whether what they're seeing is actually happening. The cold morning air hit him. Lily was still upstairs eating cereal. He had 7 minutes before he needed to be back inside to walk her to school. "Michael Carr," Amelia said. It was not a question. "Yeah," he said. He looked at the cars, the men standing at respectful distances beside them, the way the whole street had gone quiet. In that particular way, it goes quiet when something unusual arrives in it. "How did you find my address?" "Your license plate. I know a few people." She paused. "I wanted to thank you properly." "You already thanked me." He kept his voice even. "You don't need to do anything. I know I don't." She looked at him steadily. "That's not why I'm here." There was a beat of silence, in which the distance between them was measured, not in feet, but in something else, entirely, in the weight of those 3 vehicles and the people in them, in the coat that cost more than his monthly rent, in the fact that she had arrived at his building with a small staff, and he was standing there in a jacket he had owned for 4 years. "Who are you?" he asked, and she told him. Her full name was Amelia Whitmore. The Whitmore in question was Whitmore Capital Group, founded by her grandfather, expanded by her father, a holding company with interests in healthcare infrastructure, commercial real estate, and logistics technology across 14 states. The current valuation, based on the previous year's filings, was approximately $4.2 billion. Amelia was the only child of Richard Whitmore, who had been in failing health for the past 18 months, and she had been named in his estate planning as the primary heir. She was also a registered nurse. She had completed her degree at 24 over her family's considerable objection and had been working at Street Francis for 3 years on a salary that represented about 0.5% of her annual trust disbursement. She worked because she wanted to. She had kept her professional life and her family name in entirely separate compartments for reasons that were, she explained, complicated. The night at the Riverside Lodge was not an accident of circumstance. Amelia had done it before, checked herself into inexpensive places, paid for things with cash, moved through the world as someone without a name attached to a fortune, as a way of remembering what it felt like to be in the world, without the particular filter that wealth puts on every human interaction. She had been doing it every few months for 2 years. No one had ever helped her. Some people had been polite. Some had been unkind. Michael Carr had given her the last of his cash, without asking anything, without knowing anything, and then walked out into the rain. "I needed to understand why someone does that," she said. They were standing outside his building, and the morning was cold and gray. "I still don't. Fully. It wasn't complicated," Michael said. "You needed it more than I did that night." She looked at him for a long moment. "I looked into your situation. The bills. The job. I want to help." He felt the thing in his chest that he had learned to feel before the refusal came, a tightening, a kind of pride that knew itself to be pride, and was not ashamed of it. "I appreciate that," he said. "But no, I haven't offered anything yet." "You're about to." She studied him. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She smiled, very slightly, the way a person smiles when a situation confirms something they had hoped was true. "I'll be back," she said. It was not a threat. It was closer to a promise. He went back upstairs and walked Lily to school. He did not tell her about the woman in the charcoal coat and the 3 black cars. He told her to have a good day. She told him to have a good day, too, and skipped into the building, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment watching her go, and thought about the $4.2 billion and how completely impossible everything felt, and how he had no idea what to do with any of it. He went to work. Amelia came back 3 more times over the following 2 weeks, not with cars and staff alone in a gray SUV, and only when she had texted first, which she did because she was. Michael would come to understand, a person who paid attention to other people's limits. They talked in the parking lot the first time, then on the front steps, then once inside because it was raining again. And Lily was at school, and there was coffee. She was direct in a way he had not expected. She did not perform warmth. She did not try to make herself seem smaller or more ordinary than she was. She was simply present, curious, attentive, honest, and she listened to him with the quality of attention that Michael had only ever experienced from people who had learned to listen the hard way. He told her about the cold storage job, and Gary Pittman, and the HR complaints, and the scheduling that had been quietly punishing him for 3 months. He told her about the rent shortfall and the medical bills. He did not tell her these things as requests for help. He told them as facts, the way he would tell anyone who was sitting across from him and asking genuine questions. She asked about Lily. He showed her a photo on his phone. Amelia looked at it for a long time. "She has your eyes," Amelia said. "Her mother's, actually. But I'll take it." The silence after that was comfortable in a way that surprised him. He was not a man who made comfortable silences easily. But the complications did not disappear because the conversations were good. Michael understood the math of the distance between them too well to pretend otherwise. He had seen how people looked at Amelia's name in news searches, the investment announcements, the philanthropic boards, the profile in a business magazine from 2 years ago that called her one of the most quietly influential figures in mid-market healthcare investment. He was a man who checked tire pressure at the side of a cheap motel. The idea that any of this would resolve into something straightforward was, he told himself, not realistic. He sat with that assessment and tried to be honest about where it came from. Some of it was practical, the visible, unavoidable gap between their circumstances that would require enormous effort to navigate and might not be worth the attempt. Some of it was something else. He had grown up in a family where asking for help was treated as a kind of failure, where accepting anything from anyone always came with an invisible ledger attached. His father had worked 2 jobs and refused a better apartment in a nicer district because he said he didn't want to owe anyone the difference. Michael had inherited that instinct, the way you inherit the shape of your hands, not through decision, but through proximity, through having watched someone live that way long enough that it became a template. He respected that inheritance. He also understood, on the clearer-headed mornings, that it could cost him things he actually wanted. He did not know yet what he wanted, exactly. That uncertainty was its own kind of difficulty. So he kept going to work. He paid what he could on the bills. He did not call Amelia when things were hard. The notice from the property management company arrived on a Tuesday. 3 months behind on the rent, the sum of the shortfall month, plus partial payments on the 2 months after came to $1,480. The notice gave him 10 days to pay in full or begin vacating. Michael read it twice, folded it, and put it in the folder under the stack of mail. 2 days later, Lily came home from school with a cough. By the following morning, it had moved into her chest, the rattling, wheezing kind he had come to recognize from her previous infections. He called her doctor. The earliest appointment was in 4 days. He took her to urgent care instead, waited 2 hours, and left with a prescription that cost $67 after his insurance discount. He had $42 in the account. He called Dennis, who was in the middle of a shift. He left a message. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily fell asleep and went through the numbers again, the way a person returns to a broken thing, in the hope that this time it will show them a way out. It did not show him a way out. He did not call Amelia. He sat there for a long time. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of the radiator ticking and the distant noise of a car passing on the street below. He was aware, sitting in that silence, of how much of his life had been organized around this particular kind of stillness, the stillness of a problem with no clean exit, where the options available to you were simply different calibrations of the same difficulty. He was used to it. That did not mean it was easy. He got up, went to the kitchen, made tea, and thought about what he could sell. The answer was, not much, and nothing fast enough. Amelia found out on Friday. She learned it not from Michael, but from a conversation with someone in the building she had been in the neighborhood. She would tell him later, and had stopped to ask one of the older residents if she had seen Michael recently. The resident, a woman named Gloria, who had lived in the building for 22 years, and had appointed herself its unofficial chronicler, told her everything. The notice. The sick girl. The waiting. Amelia sat in her car for a long time after that. She understood what was at stake more clearly than Michael might have expected. She knew that if she walked upstairs and put money on his kitchen table, she would not be helping him, she would be doing something to him, something that had a cost attached to it, that no amount of goodwill could subtract. She had grown up watching people give to her father's projects, and she had grown up watching the way that giving, done wrong, turned the people it was aimed at into objects of someone else's generosity rather than agents of their own lives. She was not going to do that to Michael Carr. She made some phone calls instead. Michael got the call from his supervisor at the cold storage facility on a Monday morning, 2 days before his eviction deadline. It was not Gary Pittman who called. It was the regional operations director, a man named Frank Bowden, whom Michael had met exactly once, at a company meeting the previous fall. Bowden told him that the company had been reviewing staffing and had identified Michael for a transfer to their logistics, coordination division, a salaried position, benefits, starting at a rate Michael did not immediately believe he had heard correctly. He asked Bowden to repeat the number. $44,000 per year. With a signing adjustment for the mid-year transfer date, Michael sat with the phone in his hand after the call ended. He thought about Amelia. He thought about the 3 black cars and the charcoal coat and the $4.2 billion and the way she had said, "I'll be back," like a person who keeps their word. He thought about whether he was angry and found that he was not quite angry, but something adjacent to it, unsettled in a way that had pride in it and gratitude in it and frustration in it, all at the same time. He called her. "Was it you?" he said when she picked up. A pause. "I made a call," she said. "The position existed. I didn't create it. Amelia, your file had been flagged for retention. Someone needed to notice it. I noticed it." He pressed his fingers against his eyes. Outside, the sky was the particular gray of a morning that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. "I told you I didn't want that. You told me you didn't want charity," she said. "This is a job. You'll earn it. I've seen your work record, Michael. You'll earn it in the first quarter." Another pause. "You can say no. The offer stands on its own. It's a real position with a real need. I didn't invent it for you. But if you say no, that's the end of it." He stood at his window for a long time. Below, the street went about its morning. A woman walked a dog. A kid on a bicycle navigated around a pothole. The ordinary business of ordinary lives, continuous and indifferent to the question he was trying to answer. He thought about Lily's cough, which was better now, almost gone. He thought about the folder on the kitchen table. He thought about the kind of person he wanted Lily to see when she looked at him, not a man who was too proud to be helped, but a man who knew the difference between help that diminished you and help that asked you to show what you were capable of. "I accept," he said. The story became public in a way that neither Michael nor Amelia had planned or particularly wanted. It came out the way most things come out, through a peripheral witness who connected dots and shared them. The motel manager at the Riverside Lodge had told someone, who told someone else, and eventually the outline of it reached a local journalist who had been covering economic displacement stories in the city for the previous year. He was a careful reporter. He verified what he could. He called Michael, who was reluctant. He called Amelia, who was more reluctant. He published anyway, because the facts were the facts and the facts were interesting. The headline was careful. "Local man's quiet act of generosity, connected to major heiress." The story ran inside the Metro section, not on the front page, but the response was not inside section. By the following morning, the regional television affiliates had picked it up. By the afternoon, the national feeds were carrying a shortened version. By the end of the week, Michael had received over 300 messages through the facility's general contact line alone, and the HR department had quietly moved him to a private extension. Gary Pittman sent him a congratulatory email. Michael read it once and did not respond. The part that cut deepest, in the way that certain true things cut, was the recording. Someone at the cold storage facility, not someone Michael could identify, not someone he had known was watching, had filmed a brief clip of Gary dressing Michael down in the locker room 3 weeks earlier, the same performance that Michael had documented in his HR complaint. The clip appeared alongside the news story in several repostings. It showed Gary using language and a tone that made the company's communications department issue a statement within 48 hours. Gary was placed on administrative review. Michael felt no particular satisfaction watching that unfold. He had not set it in motion and had no investment in how Gary's story ended. What he felt, if he was honest, was something quieter, a recognition that the record had been corrected, that the version of events in which a man like Gary Pittman got to define a man like Michael Carr had been replaced, finally, by the actual one. That mattered. It did not need to be celebrated to matter. Amelia gave one interview to the journalist who had broken the story, and she gave it on the record and in full. She said that she had been in circumstances that were not her own one night, and that she had been treated with basic human decency by a man who had every reason to keep walking, and that she did not want to characterize what Michael had done as exceptional because she didn't think it should be exceptional. She thought it should be ordinary, and the fact that it felt like a story worth telling said something about what had gone wrong and how people treated each other. She said Michael Carr was not a symbol. He was a person. She asked people to remember that. The quote that circulated most widely was shorter than any of that. Someone trimmed it to 6 words from the middle of her answer. He didn't look at my price. It was slightly out of context. It was also, in the way of slightly out of context things, entirely true. Michael watched the news cycle move through him and around him, and eventually past him the way weather moves through a place disruptive and then gone, leaving things changed in ways that took time to assess. He was not comfortable with the tension. He had never sought it, but he found that he could carry the story because it was his story, not a version of him that had been invented by someone else, but an accurate account of something he had actually done, for reasons he could actually defend. He moved into the logistics coordination role at the end of the month. The work was harder in the good way. It required thinking, not just effort, and it required communication and problem solving, and the kind of consistent judgment that Michael had always had, and had simply never been given room to use. His supervisor, a methodical woman named Carol Breen, told him at the end of his 3rd week that he was ahead of where she expected him to be. He thanked her. He went home and told Lily that work was going well. She said she already knew because he was smiling more. He paid the rent arrears in full on a Wednesday afternoon, standing at the management office with a money order and the quiet, precise satisfaction of a man settling a debt that had been pressing on him for months. The woman behind the desk looked at the amount and then looked at him and said she'd heard about him in the news. He said thank you and collected his receipt and left. The folder on the kitchen table got thinner through October and November as the bills moved from the outstanding column to the paid one. It was not a dramatic process. It was slow and methodical, and it was the most satisfying thing he had experienced in years. Amelia and he continued to talk. They did not call it anything. They texted sometimes about small things, a photograph she sent of a tree outside the hospital that was turning a particular color of orange, a question he asked about a recipe he was trying to cook for the first time, a story about something Lily had said that he typed out and sent at 11 at night without thinking about it and then thought, well, there it is. They met for coffee twice. Once Amelia came to the apartment and met Lily properly, and Lily showed her the collection of rocks she kept on the windowsill and explained at length the significance of each one, and Amelia sat cross-legged on the floor and listened with the quality of attention that Michael recognized because it was the same quality he brought to those conversations, and something moved in his chest watching that. Lily asked him later after Amelia had gone, "Is she your friend?" "Yes," Michael said. "Do you like her a lot?" He considered this. "Yes," Lily nodded, satisfied with the math of it. "Me too," she said, and went back to her rocks. On a Saturday in late November, Michael walked Lily to the park 3 blocks from their building. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of cold that has light in it, that feels like something rather than just the absence of warmth. Lily ran ahead to the swings. He sat on a bench with his hands around a coffee cup and watched her, the way he always watched her, with the particular attention of a person who has decided that this, exactly, is worth every difficult thing. His phone buzzed. A message from Amelia. "I'm nearby. Is that okay?" He typed back, "Yes." And then, after a moment, because it was true and he had decided that being honest was worth the uncertainty of it, "I'm glad." She arrived 10 minutes later. She was wearing a dark green jacket he hadn't seen before, and her hair was down, and she sat beside him on the bench without ceremony, the way a person sits beside someone they have been comfortable with long enough that arrival doesn't require announcement. Lily spotted her from the swings and yelled her name and waved enormously. Amelia laughed a real laugh, unguarded, the kind you can't perform, and waved back. Michael watched this and felt something settle in him, the way things settle when they find the place they were always supposed to be. He did not say any of that out loud. That was not the kind of man he was. But he was quiet beside her in the winter light, and she was quiet beside him, and neither of them required the silence to be filled. And that was its own kind of statement. There are things that money cannot buy, and things that poverty cannot take. Michael Carr had known that in some abstract form, his whole adult life, had held it as a kind of private conviction against the weight of all the months when the math didn't work and the choices were bad and the world seemed structured specifically to exhaust people who were just trying to do it right. He had not expected to have it demonstrated back to him by a billionaire's daughter in a rainy motel parking lot. He had not expected a great many things about the months that followed. But Lily was laughing on the swings, and the sky was clear, and the coffee in his hand was warm, and the person sitting next to him was there because she had chosen to be, not because of anything he owned or represented or could offer in the conventional accounting of such things, but simply because of who he was on one specific rainy night when he made a specific choice, and that was the whole of it. That was everything.